All right, we're live. All right, this is the On Fairness workshop preparation. This is going to be compiled and used as a material for a workshop for the National Cooperative Association, if everything goes well with them. We have two sketch notes in the comments that you can follow along with. This is based off of actually 3 talks that we did previously, one on fairness, one on compensation system for services companies, and there's also another talk that we did on compensation for projects and products. So we also have a set of questions. What we want to do with the workshop is get people familiar with the different compensation systems for a services company and for a cooperative, and also to maybe get people thinking about their compensation system that they use in their regular job. So there's 2 components, 2 sides to compensation. One of them is, or the first one is fairness. Out of all of the talks that we've done and all of the topics that we've gone over, fairness and compensation is the one that people ask me about the most. So we figured we'd do this one as our first workshop and try to help people there. So with the, if you're looking at the, and I'm going to go ahead and share. Let's see here. Share this. Oops. So we also have 2 papers that go with this. We've already gone through the 2 papers in different talks. So there's a fairness paper and a compensation paper. But what we're going to be going over is the sketch notes. And what we want to do is make it to where people can understand fairness really quickly. Maybe in 3 to 5 minutes is really what my goal is. And then also compensation system is going to be a bit more difficult to understand in 3 to 5 minutes. But I want to try to get it to where people would share this information with other people, their friends, and discuss it. The paper route and the blog route and word of mouth, or me just talking to people, it's really tough. But I think with this format, even as a workshop, and us discussing, maybe even debating some of these things, I think it may stick. So, all right. So as far as this sketch note, what we want to do, I'm just going to go over these high level pieces and try to get you to understand how you should critique a fairness system. And then also these workshop questions, I want to try to get it to the point to where and maybe change the workshop or maybe change how I go over the material, but get it to where people can maybe answer these questions at the end of the workshop. So that's kind of the goal. And then also for everybody watching, if there's other questions that you think should be answered by the end of the workshop, that will help tremendously. So I can add those, and then I can make sure to go over that when I'm doing workshop. All right. So what is fairness? Right. That is a controversial question. Most people think uh, fairness is kind of something for maybe little kids, or oftentimes they think that that the world's not fair and that you can't have a fair system and all these things. They kind of have a little dichotomy in their head where they'll say some things are fair and you should work towards it, and then other times, oh, the world's not fair, so don't try it. Well, there is a whole field that studies fairness called fair division within game theory, uh, a subsection of game theory, and it's kind of complicated, but what I tried to do is distill some of the lessons from within game theory and pull them out and then apply them to the understanding of fairness, and then we can turn around and try to apply that to a compensation system. And we're kind of going to go over this stuff pretty quickly. This is previously 2-hour-long talks, and we're going to try to go over it, both of them in 1 hour. But I'm going to stop for questions, and hopefully we don't get derailed too quickly. All right, so there's a couple of elements when you're thinking about fairness. One thing right from the beginning to understand, within fair division, there's a concept of a guarantee. And so the first question is the first intuition that people have with fairness is they'll think, okay, any system can be gamed and anything can be hacked. Well, actually, there's a such thing as a guarantee for certain fairness procedures. And for those guarantees, or for a system with a guarantee, you can't hack it beyond the guarantee. There's lots of procedures, fairness procedures, and when I say fairness procedure, I'm talking about a way to distribute some type of resource, some type of compensation, money, or whatever. There's there's procedures where you can have a guarantee of certain things, like, okay, and then we're going to get into this, but certain components like proportionality, efficiency, and equitability, we're going to talk about that in a bit. So that's the first thing to understand, is there are mathematical guarantees for certain procedures where actually you can't game them beyond what they say. Right? And then there's two other things to think about. Within game theory, there's a concept of rationality. Most people, when they think of the word logic or they think of the word rationality, they think of all kinds of weird things. They might think of Spock from Star Trek, or all types of different things. Formal logic. Rationality is not necessarily a formal logic within game theory. It simply means choosing the outcomes that you previously said are aligned to your preferences. So if you say, I prefer oranges over apples, and then you're presented with a choice of oranges and apples, if you choose the orange, then you are rational. If you don't, then you are irrational. That's a rationality, right? So that's rationality and irrationality definitions. And allocation is separating the pie. So if there's 5 of us and we're all deciding how much, how to separate the pie or what have you, however we end up doing it, that's the allocation towards all of us. The pie was allocated. Each one of us, we get a portion. So those are two terms to understand when you're trying to read within fair division or game theory. These other two are things that I kind of came up with because it's kind of hard to understand. or reason about fairness without having these terms. So there's a there's a way to think about your preferences where they're objective, and there's a way to think about them as them being subjective. Uh, it's important to understand this because they're the different fairness procedures. They tie into your preferences. Preferences comes up over and over and over again within the literature about fairness. So um, if you can, what I went ahead and defined as objective is any kind of allocation or valuation or preference that can actually be written down. And these are the tools, the elements that are used to build the fairness procedure. Those are the things that are like the inputs. Subjective is uh, they're kind of like the causes for your preference ordering is a phrase that they'll use. So they're kind of it could be psychological. It could be that you prefer oranges over apples when you're in your right mind, but every time you reach for the orange, you remember, um, you know, being burnt or something like that, and you decide not to go for the orange. So you can have a conscious preference and a subconscious. So these are all subjective things that might not be mapped out, they might not be recorded. I put this in here to try to account for people's objections on what is subjective and what's not. And then also my personal problems where people try to exploit um, fairness procedures or just groups of people in general. Um, so we're going to talk about that more later. All right. The meat and potatoes of fair division are these five components of fairness. So proportionality, this is the first thing that comes to mind for most people when they think about fair or when they're saying that fair isn't fair or there's no such thing as fair is egalitarianism. When someone says or we want to make a fair compensation system or we want to make any type of system fair, a knee-jerk reaction is maybe some group or some person saying, oh, not everybody worked as hard, so everyone doesn't deserve the same portion. So just to get that out of the way, there's a term for it, proportionality, egalitarianism, and it's defined as getting one end of the to each person, right? So that's splitting it evenly. All right. So when you're critiquing somebody, now you have a term for it. The next term, efficiency, is very important when you're discussing things with Americans or people from the West. Efficiency is when if you were to have a pie and allocate, if there's five people and you slice the pie into uh, five pieces and you gave the four pieces away and you left one piece, that's literally having something on the table left over, and that's inefficient, right? Um, that's the easy way to think about it. There is a more complicated way, which is actually important for reasoning about fairness, and you should try to understand it. It's called Pareto Optimality. So Pareto Optimality is when you have an allocation, which we defined earlier, right? So you split up the pie and you have some procedure for splitting up the pie to, five pieces of five people, whatever. Something or a procedure or an allocation actually is Pareto optimal if there's no way to give one person more and have everyone else stay at least the same. So that is the game theory definition for efficient, right? It's kind of, when you understand it, it's intuitive, right? It's like if you were to see it happen in front of you and you're seeing something left on the table, hey, why aren't you allocating this to someone? You should just do it.
We miscalculated.
Right? Well, being American, you would say something like that. We'd say that. It's like, obviously you're an idiot because you left something on the table, right? But other cultures, they might say, no, everyone gets a certain piece. You're getting a little more. No, leave it on the table. Mm-hmm. So we have a term for that. We have a term for efficiency. Okay, so just keep in mind, efficiency is the thing that we all have been programmed we've internalized it. Envy freeness is, like it says here, when a person perceives their portion as being tied with the highest portion. So you're not saying, hey, they got more than me, right? There's different ways to make something envy free. One of them is, we're all familiar, well, people in the corporate world are familiar. Oh, you don't know what anyone makes. Nobody talks about it. So they made it envy free. And it also puts you in a bad negotiating position, but envy freeness, right? Now, manipulability. I almost want to say that's not a word, but he used it in the book, so it's a word, right? So it's when knowing one person's preferences allows for an increase in another person's preferences. So if you can do something like, say, you could see different situations in real life where this happens, where you may act like you don't like a thing just so that someone else, like if you were to say, you and a partner or something, you're deciding to go to the store, and how they call this in game theory, call this the battle of the sexes. Okay, so one person wants to go to the ball game, the other person wants to go to the opera. Well, what happens is people play that game over and over and over again, and they start acting like, I really hate. It could be like one person, the opera, it's fine. Like, let's just say that the guy, oh, the opera, I internally, I don't really care. I can go or not go. It's fine. But when I'm talking with you, I'm going to say I hate it because I want to go to the ball game more often. I want to go 3 times to the ball game and let's go to the opera. Because I know how much you love the opera, I can do that because you won't, what they call, shirk and say, let's just not go to anything. I don't care. So that's a way to manipulate based off of how much I know you like the opera, and I'm going to act like I don't. So that's a more.
So, but I'm sorry, is the manipulation saying you hate the opera, or is it saying I don't? I could leave or take it.
The manipulation is me, because I know, or manipulability is because I know how much you like the opera, me doing something, changing something, right? If you were to do proportionality, you go to opera one time, now we're going to the ball game one time, right?
That would be. So these are strategies for achieving fairness.
Components of fairness. Okay.
Or some of these would be how people could manipulate doing something fairly if you don't recognize it. So that ideally everyone goes, oh, I understand how to do this in a good way. And then there's things that someone could try. So I think the awareness is good too. I mean, if you care, then you're going to try to avoid it, or I would. Mm-hmm. But you may be dealing with someone that is using manipulability because they know how you're thinking.
Sure. So, and then, it's actually a very concrete thing. When you have a fairness procedure, it either is resistant or adheres to these components. So you can have a fairness procedure that is immune to manipulability, right? And so that's one where it's important because people say, oh, you can game anything. Well, actually, there's fairness procedures that whatever your definition of gaming is, you can't manipulate it. It's always going to come out with the same thing.
So would an example of that be if someone wanted to create like a contract, or you're trying to collaborate, and so then you could say, here are all the things we need to do to make sure that this is fair, that we both agree that it's fair.
And you make the contract, but contract is just some rules. It's a procedure. So
the procedure.
So it could be that the contract can be manipulated. Based, I mean, like moral hazard is one, adverse selection is another one. These are ones that everybody, well, in the economics, they do. So you have to have a procedure, like the simple one. If we're going to do egalitarianism, you can know my portion all day. You can't do anything. So that would be what you're saying with the contract. The contract is egalitarian, proportionality. So now this, if you don't remember any other component, this is the one to remember, equitability. This is the important one. So when a person believes that their own valuation of their portion is the same as another person's valuation of their portion. So this is where you're getting sophisticated, okay? You're saying that, more of a mature, nuanced system. You incorporate risk, you incorporate how much time, all these things like that. And you say, okay, we built a bridge, right? And it took, it's a small bridge. Let's say it just took, 10,000 hours to build or something. And, we're going to get paid $50 million for the bridge. Well, I only put in 5 hours. I wasn't having to swing from a trapeze to build it or whatever crazy things people have to do with a bridge. And, whatever. And then the other person, they were having to do all kinds of swinging on a rope from one side of to the other side of the ravine to build the bridge, whatever crazy things they have to do. And it was risky. It was 10,000 hours total. So they spent, 9,500 hours or whatever, all that time. Now, allocation at the end, 50 million. Oh, you only spent 5 hours. You only get whatever, a couple $1,000 or whatever, and this other person gets the lion's share. Well, you think it's fair because you think it's equitable if you take into account risk, you take into account all the other things, and you believe that their valuation of what they got is the same as yours. You feel like, oh, if I were to take all those risks and all that, then that'd be great. I didn't take those risks. So that's equitability. That is a mature way to think about fairness. Now, there are procedures that guarantee equitability. So the different procedures that are available, they have a mix and match of all these things. Right? So now, final component is strategy. I think that this is important because it allows us to reason about how other people are thinking about fairness. So fair division, that's what we were just going over. A strategic position that seeks to use fairness procedure to guarantee, right, the fairness components, those 5 things we just went over. Now, altruism, saying, okay, I'm going to, let's just say, in a services situation, I'm going to build this person up, and it's going to take me a bunch of unbillable hours to help them and to show them everything I know, and they might leave. You're taking risks, you're not getting paid, but you're doing it for altruistic reasons. You're not getting anything out of it. Now, altruism has a biological definition, and just feel like it's important to go over that because some people don't believe that there's such thing as altruism. There's within biology, there's altruism. There are species that take care of other species that don't propagate their genes. They don't help them. They adopt them and treat them as their own. Humans do that too, which you're familiar with. But other species do that, and then that's considered a biological altruism. So if you want to look up altruism on Wikipedia, you'll find that. So it is possible. Exploitation, a strategic position that leverages subjective elements in order to subvert fairness. Basically, if you know that another person, or let's say, if you have a way of either coercing or kind of just tricking someone else to go against their own best interests, that's an exploitation. That's one definition. Another one is, well, the formal definition is, an example is, okay, if you have a widget and it takes you it takes you $6 to make the widget, and then someone else comes around and sells the widget for $10, that $4 is called the surplus. If you do not have any say where that $4 goes, that's exploitation. So within fairness, some way of trying to get the person to not care about the surplus, the way to do that is some psychological trick, and then that's exploitation. But now, any questions?
Is the so the top 5, 6 here, are these, because it seems like manipulability, equitability, and envy freeness, basically you can categorize these components of fairness as either subjective or objective. Manipulability, equitability, envy freeness, those are subjective. Proportionality, efficiency, those seem objective because we're talking about math for those two and people's perceptions or beliefs in the other 3.
Yeah. So all the components, they're all on the objective side. There are ways to measure all of those things. Efficiency, Pareto Optimality.
Oh, I see.
Right? Manipulability, all of those, they are all applied to a fairness procedure. If the fairness procedure does not fulfill those components, then that's how you critique. So those 5, that's how you critique a fairness procedure. How to distribute, how to allocate. The subjective is in there simply because there's a such thing as exploitation, trying to get people to not care, about the surplus.
Yeah,
is an easy way to think about it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is there any other? So I think I brought if you care about this stuff, this guy, Stephen Brahms, is the man as far as fair division and all the procedures, not all the procedures, but the understanding of the fairness procedures and everything like that are in this book. Any more questions here? I think we're going. We spent over 30 minutes on this side. All right, now that was the easy stuff. Now it's hard stuff. Compensation systems. I normally think about cooperatives as the same as a consultancy, the same as any like a large services organization that has a flat hierarchy or flatter hierarchy. They have the problem of distributing pay. so these problems are old. I like to use law firms as an example because attorneys know the law and they just so happen to pick partnership as their business org. Right? So compensation systems, the types that you have within any type of structure that's going to be flat. You got keep what you kill. That is the easiest to implement. Within economics, they would say that it has low monitoring costs. Then you have the gray hair system or the wise person system. And that system, you do your work, and at the end of the year, some wise person decides what your bonus is. That is subjective in our definition that we used earlier. Then you've got point systems. These are difficult to implement, but they are objective. And you can use them to incentivize long-term goals, such as marketing and all these other things that programmers normally don't care about. So that is an important part of thinking or reasoning about any type of compensation system. Now, what we call co-optation, so cooperative compensation. We went ahead and chose a point system. We based it off of the most fair system that I could find with that attorneys apply. That's based off of points. We converted it to hours and sales. And seniority is ignored. One of the things within a gray hair system, seniority is, they love it. But someone can, a way to manipulate the a system, that the gray hair system, is to work hard for 5 years, 10 years, whatever, and then lay around for 15, 30 years and don't do anything. Right? So point systems ignore that. They try to be merit-based as much as possible. So now the first hard concept is economic value. Trying to determine what the economic value of a partner is at the essence of an incentive system, so that you can compensate them. So the market value of a partner is the value to the firm. Now to keep in mind, there's a value to the world. You could bill $250 an hour, $350 an hour, because the world thinks that you just are great. And then there's the value to the firm also. So based on what you're doing internally, we're going to talk about that some more. Then you have associates, which could be contractors, it could be W-2, but this group is going to be just the market value. So you can't pay programmers $10 an hour. That's not their market value. It's not going to work. Associates get paid their market value, but their value to the firm, long-term goals and all that stuff, is not assessed. Then you have a firm or organization value. That could be your brand, the firm. Like if you were a company called IBM, you could be a mouth breather and get contracts and be rich just because of the brand that IBM has. So there's a lot of value in name. Right, so any questions so far about value? All right. Partners, responsible hours. Within partners, you can do stuff that you bill for. You also can bring in work. This is a problem that needs to be solved with any field that's a consultancy. Some people are grinders and some people are finders, or some people are a mix of both. The grinders are people within, say, law. They are good in the courtroom, or they can be transactional. They're good at pumping out contracts. The finders, they are what's called rainmakers, salespeople, kind of. They can pull in $1 million cases, $10 million cases, and they can be horrible in the courtroom, but they can just blink at somebody and pull in work. And you have to somehow accommodate for those people, right? So that would be the finders. That would be responsible hours. They have account management. They're working with building up a contract for a customer, and then they're actually closing it. And that would be what's called origination. They are the ones who originated that revenue stream, that project, right? So you can think of that as commission. Then you have their working hours, which you understand as just billable hours to some customer. So any questions about partners / members? Also, partners, members within a cooperative, they're people who have a vote. Within a cooperative, they have one vote. They don't have like a percentage that's higher than somebody else on, what to do. And there's also other types of good practices for partners. They need to work. They can't not work. So maybe something like 20 hours a week minimum. You can't have people where they don't have a vested interest in what's happening, the direction, different things like that. We have a whole paper on that. So that's what a partner is. Any questions? All right. Associates. So non-partners and contractors, your best friend, but this is not a member, whatever. They're ephemeral. So they may work with you, they may disappear every now and then and come back, that kind of thing. One thing to understand about the compensation system we're going to talk about is the margin on associates. There's a such thing within professional services, consultancies, what have you, as leverage. Using groups of people wisely. That's a skill, and it should be rewarded. Right? You could call it management. You can call it mentoring. There's different ways, but there's a way to make it to where somebody that would be on their own billable only at $10 an hour, but because they're coupled with someone, they now billable at $50 an hour because they pick out just the right tasks for them to do, and they can do them, and they can give them direction. There's such thing as margin on associates.
So this isn't like this partners associate split is not it's not the same. It's not analogous to management labor split. Like associates would also be management who have no stake in the company, like shares.
Associate, yeah. I mean, normally it doesn't happen that way, but I can totally see an associate managing a project.
Oh yeah,
totally. Right. So now firm hours, that's approved non-billable hours. What is that? Somebody taking the trash out. Something that needs to happen. Usually this is marketing. Right? You can't bill to a customer. Marketing. Usually you'll get together and vote, say marketing is a good thing. You do. Firm-wide realization is the most difficult thing to understand in compensation system here, and it is based off of opportunity cost. So you could have a partner that bills $500 an hour. There are things that have to get done that you all got together and voted on that said you have to get done. Let's just say taking in the trash out. And you need to, the first thing that comes to mind is, why didn't you just hire someone to take the trash out? Well, it could be that you're just too silly to do it, and it still needs to get taken out. So that doesn't get you away from it. Somebody has to do it. So there could be somebody that's billable at $500 an hour. There could be someone that's billable at $50 an hour. If the $500 an hour person who, this accounts for this, by the way, it accounts for, it goes by quarters or a year. So it's not really an hour. It's if you bring in $50,000 a quarter versus $5,000 a quarter. If that $500 an hour person turns around and takes the trash out, it costs that much money to take the trash out. If the $50 an hour person takes the trash out, they are allowing the $500 an hour person to work at $500 an hour. This is what the firm-wide realization is all about. It's compensating somebody for taking the initiative, and it could be the $500 an hour person does it, but this is in the algorithm. You as a firm won't make that money. You can get together and say, stop it. The other person's doing it or not, but it's still going to be fair based off of the distribution.
This sounds related to the margin on associates, where
It is.
It's kind of the opposite direction.
Yeah. Margin on associates is one important, and then the firm-wide realization is another.
Yeah.
So you've got non-billable but approved, and that's what you want, that you care about. You approved to take it out of the trash. You approved the marketing, and so you all agreed to it, and so you said it had to be done, and so there could be a pecking order of people who go out and do things on their own volition. It ends up being fair, depending on whatever people decide on. People will rationally say, "Yeah, this person is billing that much. Most likely, they're going to go ahead and, unless they just don't like it, it ends up being fair anyways." So that's what I'm calling mitigation, opportunity costs, and all that. And then you've got overhead. These are things that are non-billable. Your pivotal tracker expenses, right? Things that you just can't bill to anyone. They are always there. They are. It's something in the algorithm, something to take note of. But for associates, you have startup costs and like a wind down cost for overhead, which is separate from partners. Partners should be slower, and so you can have a bigger ramp up cost on your overhead and not take a big hit. Associates, if you have big ramp up and shutdown costs, that's problematic, and that's why it's separate in the these calculations. So I would say for this calculation, having explained it to people and talked about it, reasoned about it with people, I would say that the easiest way to understand it is to take the Excel spreadsheet that we have, where I plugged in a bunch of numbers, and play with that if you want to actually see it, and try to break it, try to make it to where it's unfair. Like, oh, I did this and now I'm rich, right? That would be the best way to try to understand it. Keep in mind, or try to reason, the thing to try to really reason about or think about is that firm-wide realization. All the components in this algorithm, bottom right-hand side in the red box, they're all enumerated here, and you can kind of see what they are. So, any questions?
I'm trying to relate the split between non-billable, non-approved to non-billable and approved, and like just trying to connect that to how I think about stuff already. You know what I mean? To like make that connection is like is non-billable but approved. Does that tend to be a certain part of the budget?
Yeah. So what happens in real life is, let me just do it for law firms, right? What happens in real life, you get a couple lawyers get together, they're friends, they say, hey, let's start a firm. they get together and they start failing, or they could be great rock stars individually, but they start realizing, we need to do marketing. And this Google is expensive. It's $8,000 a month. Okay, for us to be the winner in Austin, it's like $8,000 a month. So have your name on the first page or more. And someone might need to start writing, blogging, something. That takes time. And when you say keep what you kill, you bring in your contract, you eat. You might pull me in on your trial, and I eat with you, whatever. But start to feel the pain slowly but surely of not incentivizing a long-term goal of marketing, where it takes maybe 20 hours a month, something like that. You start feeling the pain, and then as you get bigger, it could be, and we have another talk about this, but small groups, you could have a hero. It ends up happening to where somebody will say, I'm going to do an extra 40 hours a week for marketing, and we'll all eat. But as it gets bigger, it doesn't work anymore. They start to be shirking, like, you do this. I'm not going to do it. And so it ends up being where, like what you would think, that you have to incentivize it. And so incentivizing, you all as a group say, hey, let's go ahead and approve a budget, what you said, of marketing hours, right? And oftentimes it doesn't take that long. It's like, hey, I used to be with Trantolo and Trantolo, and they did it this way, and they're rich. Let's just do what they did, and they pay this much for marketing, and they learn that way.
Mm-hmm. So what's an example then of the non-billable, non-approved?
Literally, pivotal tracker.
Rent, right?
Yeah,
or your lease
rent,
payments or whatever.
overhead. Yeah, it's really like all your buildings, all that stuff.
I'm just trying to, I guess, understand. And maybe this is, I'm just overthinking it because of this or whatever, but like, I'm just trying to, what about overhead? Because I understand overhead. We probably all understand, we have a common understanding of what overhead means, or at least an intuitive one. And so I'm trying to understand, what is it about the nature of overhead that makes it non-approved? Even though you all agreed to sign the lease and we're all sitting in the thing.
Yeah.
So there's a tacit approval.
Yeah, so it's hours. So there's expenses.
I see.
Right? So
Right.
pivotal tracker expense. And then there could be literally, like, I'm going to take the trash out.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be my hours. And okay, it smells in here, I'm taking the trash out, but we didn't approve it. So just take it out. We're not paying you for it. Because we know you're a sucker and you can't take the smell. Right? So that.
Manipulability.
Yeah.
Okay.
So these will be things that will happen that no one else is willing to compensate.
Yeah. You get ready, you vote on it. So make your bed and you lie in it. And so it ends up being fair that way.
What's the trash?
Yeah. Well, I mean, who would bring it up? Yeah. But to say it's approved, but
Would another
marketing
example,
is really what's more.
sorry,
Go ahead.
Would another example, because in my reading about co-ops and stuff, it's like you should set aside a time every week to talk about how to distribute surplus and stuff like that. Would that kind of meeting, I mean, obviously that's a way more abstract response than you guys might deal with on a day-to-day, but would that be non-billable and approved?
You have to vote on it.
Meaning
The time set aside.
Yeah.
So I think for this we're talking about compensation. So we may say that in your example, if we're going to spend some time, so we actually do governance on Fridays. And we spend time on the company. Whether or not you're going to compensate the people that attend would be decide it or not. Got it. And we don't. We just happen to, but we could decide that anyone that attends is going to get compensated if we voted that in.
Okay, now I understand. Okay, got it. Okay, got it. Understood.
I like this because it's defining something we don't, or including something in overhead that we don't think of, like normal expenses, electricity, paying your rent, internet. Those we understand. Stuff like time and people putting some effort, the trash is one example. But just going in to collaborate on something, if we don't bill for it and we're doing it anyways, then that's overhead that takes away from doing other stuff. And if you spent too much time or you have too much overhead, then it's going to hurt the group.
So the verb approved here means this activity is not approved as a ... What's the
compensation? To be compensated.
Okay, understood.
The activity won't be compensated.
If it's non-billable, I mean, can you have a billable non-approved?
No.
Okay,
That's
right.
billables to the customer.
Right.
So that would be
So billable,
pretty wild. I guess
Right,
under the irrational.
Yeah, I'm sure
We're not approving of that
Yeah,
money. I guess you really could. You actually could.
You could have everyone in the group
could.
says, "Do not do this.
Do
work
not
and build a customer."
screw with
They're like,
that customer.
But
that customer
I have
is
access.
a problem.
I'm going to invoice them. I did it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're bad customers. They're bad customers. It could be everybody gets together.
So non-approved overhead means something that we have to do, but it hasn't. It's not something. It's not something we had to prove as compensation for somebody.
Or
it's
we
just
didn't notice the value. Maybe unconsciously or consciously, we could be going, we spend this much time every week, and we realize this is actually making a difference for the whole group and should be valued. The time, we don't want it to go away. Maybe it started to go away, and so we're like, someone needs to spend time on the marketing. That's the easy one.
Yep.
But if you aren't doing it, so that the governance and going through the compensation, if someone was literally doing that weekly and as a group, and they go, hey, when we stopped doing that and we waited to do it at the end of the year, we ended up having a harder time making sure it's fair than if we did it weekly. So let's compensate the people that work on that weekly because it's better for the group. But until then, maybe they were doing it because they thought it was better, but it was not approved, not compensated.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes overhead if they could have done something else with that time. So they don't get any compensation and somewhere else is dropping in value, like billable to the customer.
Mm-hmm. So approved doesn't necessarily mean approved by a human. It may be it follows a particular process that we've implemented. Like it doesn't have to be, is it a direct vote every time, or is it like, here's the process we've established to we've hired a marketing consultant to come in, or like so it's like, it's not necessarily that it needs to be approved by a direct vote, or is it?
So I think I can respond to that unless you understand. So the way I was saying it, approved, does approved to be compensated always have to be that we voted the specific things?
Right.
I don't think so. We could say it could be more general, like we don't have to have a vote. There's some things that we go cover. You can spend this much money to go and handle this, or it's approved by actions, or maybe you put the time on there in your invoice to the group and we pay you. I would say it could be approved by the actions that happen without voting.
Because you might vote in a system that you say, like, this is a fair associate associate billing system, so we trust it to. Maybe this is like I don't want to think of one.
Yeah. Go ahead.
One thing that would come in is like, the actions can approve it afterwards, or if everyone's like, that's a good idea, but the rate at which you're going to be compensated for would probably need to be voted on.
Well, the approval, remember the firm-wide realization is always, it's already there. So approved means that you are making some partner that is highly billable not have to do whatever you're doing. So that's what that should be reserved for.
So is it an efficiency type deal? Cool. Okay. Sorry.
No, we're good. This is all question time. I'm done.
I like overhead for firm-wide, and I like it for other things. I think you can have, or not just for the partner side, the opportunity costs.
So, yeah. Any other questions? We went over 2 hour-long talks in 1 hour.
Yeah, 1 hour.
So these questions that I have on the workshop questions, this is what I'm kind of using to drive the workshop. If you guys can give me some feedback on that stuff.
The one question I have maybe before we stop recording, unless you want to do feedback on the recording, but the one question I have before that is on the formula in the bottom right. Is the sum, let's say sum of all hours worked by associates, that long acronym you have there.
Mm-hmm.
It says minus SA total compensation. Is that supposed to be a subtraction or a multiplication? Because I'm not understanding that.
What the minus is definitely.
The whole formula, yeah.
Oh, you know what? You're right.
So
yeah, no, it's you do the parentheses first and then subtract it.
Okay.
You're trying to mess with me.
I'm just checking. I'm tired.
One thing I guess. So wait, you've laid in the first part, you laid the ground rules for what fairness is, and then in the second part, this is essentially a framework for co-optimization.
Yeah.
And so I guess this is like feedback / question. Like what I'm like. So we have I guess it's like it's just decided in real time in a room, whereas like I'm trying to see here the like the transitions, like how does a co-op decide numbers for anything? Like is it all just like up to a vote, or so from basically partner rates to associate rates to contractor rates to rates for non-billable approved time? Like, is that a conversation, or is that somehow?
Some of that is a conversation, some of it isn't. Somebody brings in $1 million contract in a law firm, there's no conversation. They're just going to do, like, let's say it's a small law firm. They're going to bring in the contract or go off on their own and work it themselves. There is the conversation is, let him have whatever he wants. So figuring out a billable rate for somebody is pretty easy because they can bring in customers that have that rate. Now, with this system, you can do things that also they are not a conversation because they're automatically implemented. Again, with the $500 billable person, it doesn't matter if somebody is a mouth breather. If they take out the trash, they're going to get compensated, and their partner, they're going to get compensated more than what they would as a janitor, because they are stopping that $500 an hour person from taking out the trash. So that's also not a conversation. It's just implemented. If at the end, there's a conversation at the end of the year or whatever, where you say, hey, let's hire janitors as associates or as outsourced. But if you don't, then it must not be that painful. So you're just going to go ahead and have partners if you approved taking out the trash, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the conversation comes in with the approving of the hours. So it could be marketing, so on and so forth. That's where the conversation comes in. But the customer is always the one to decide. If you do something to where the customers aren't deciding, then it starts to be broken.
Well, it seems like you'd run into a value issue too for like if you got a superstar who's bringing in, this $1 million contract. They're doing it on some basis that is a lot. They're doing it regularly enough that it's making a significant impact. It's like, how do you? What's the value that the firm adds then to that person's ability? Or I'm not asking this as a literal question, but like the question for the partner then is like, man, is the value that the firm is providing me sufficient to overcome like the fact that I'm receiving a reduced share of my after the firm would have even seen it. So it's like I can see that being a problem. Like how do you like a really like disproportionately talented or gifted or whatever employee might actually be disruptive to a co-op in that sense?
That to me, so you're looking at it as, so I would say a rainmaker and like double rainmaker and somebody great in the courtroom.
Mm-hmm.
So they brought in this law firm, let's say it's a $10 million contract, right? And this law firm normally only makes like $500,000 a year. And then somebody comes in and says, guess what, guys? 10 million. And like, do you really think the other lawyers are going to be like, well, I've been scraping and now I'm on the $10 million contract?
Yeah.
And it's like, you're disruptive, $10 million man.
I guess I just mean like culturally, like it might.
Yeah, that person walks on water.
Yeah.
Like, oh, don't upset him.
Yeah. What I'm thinking about
is feeding us, so let him.
Yeah, thanks, Dad.
Yeah, exactly.
What I'm thinking about is like the Richard Wolff thing, where it's like embodied labor plus living labor is the total labor, and so like I'm thinking that if the labor that the person's doing so grossly outweighs what the firm is providing, then I can see how that
it naturally will separate.
What will? What do you mean?
The person, they just won't be part of the entity.
Because I can do better.
This entity doesn't bring anything to the table, so I'm on my own. Well, I just like messing with people, so I'm just going to be part of the entity.
Right.
And they like to just be along for the ride.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it just ends up working no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it's like monkeying around with it as little as possible. Let the natural incentives go from the market all the way through. And so that's where Richard Wolff doesn't talk about it explicitly as much and I think it's because everybody else talks about that.
Mm-hmm.
So he doesn't have to, right? Richard Wolff doesn't say no markets, none.
Yeah.
He doesn't say that,
mm-hmm.
but everyone else says that. I'm sorry, not everyone says that, but everyone else is talking about the markets.
Mm-hmm.
But letting it to where the labor, they have something, they have some opinion on the surplus that they made. So this $10 million contract or trial person brings this in. How much did these other attorneys who are normally doing little $500 trials and stuff like that, living paycheck to paycheck? That's not their surplus anyways, right? So they're not getting exploited. There's nothing.
And actually, so it seems like you're actually giving this would even be what you're talking about here in these handouts, and the talk is like you're giving that person who's bringing in a lot, or the person at the other end, a framework to think about, to evaluate. They're like, man, I'm bringing in like a lot of business, but like I don't want to leave the co-op because I know. So it's like it's giving them a vocabulary to talk, to analyze their situation and say, here's what we need to change because I don't want to leave the co-op, but these things need to change because by this formula I should be making this. So is that like how like kind of the point? Like,
Yeah, because normally this is all cloudy.
right.
So if somebody's serious about it and
it's
they
very
want to,
emotional.
they can
Yeah.
start to say, oh, firm-wide realization.
Right.
This person did keep me from having to take the trash out. That's a weird sentence to say,
right.
right?
Yeah. Cool.
All right, I'm gonna stop the recording.
I got a bit of feedback too. I don't know if you want that on the record or not. I think just like to piggyback off of I think Matt's last comment, I think it would be helpful for like the workshop that you do if you even had like if you were opinionated at the end of it and was like, or like you have you have several things highlighted in red, or if like, you know, this is like point system. I think I couldn't see the top of it and you're not showing your screen anymore, but like point system would be the best way to go about this. And the next level and next level, or not even the best way, or like a way that you have seen that has worked. Just to give people an idea of like, you know, because there's a lot going on here. There's subjective, there's objective, there's negative things, there's positive things, but like to have like a preferred or a nice path, a good path to go down, a happy path, I think would be helpful for people.
Yeah.
A happy path to get to the point system?
No,
Well,
that was an example.
compensation is a point system. The total thing is a point system. But the part where I think what you're saying is like I have these compensation systems and I say this one's the easiest. This one's objective. This one's objective, but it's difficult. Like that part you want me to just say all these other ones are stupid. Go ahead and do the point system.
Yeah, you know, like
at least analyze them using the computer.
you know, like, that's what I've seen work. So, you know,
No, I agree with you. I don't know your name on the phone. I mean, at least to evaluate the alternatives using the framework that you're using would be cool.
Good job, Josh. You got our marketing a little bit. So we've been working on we can stop or not. So this is about Volt Cooperative. So we've been working on a point system.